One reason this garden looks so fruitful is because each plant has plenty of space in which to grow.
Yes, putting your crops the right distance apart and having a good garden layout can make your garden a lot more productive. I'm Barbara Damrosch.
And I'm Elliot Coleman. And if you'll stay with us for the next half hour, we'll give you some hints on layout and seed sowing so you can get the most out of your garden.
On gardening naturally.
Once you've found a site for the garden, and remember that includes a spot that has plenty of sun coming in, hopefully some tree or wind protection to the north, and just plenty of space for things to grow, then you want to think about how to lay it out, where to put the different crops. Well, the first thing I think about is putting the tall crops on the north side of the garden, away from the sun, so any shade they cast will be cast where nothing is growing. And that's why these peas are here. They're going to grow up this tall trellis, cast plenty of shade, but gee, there's nothing behind them. It doesn't make any difference. And my early tomatoes that are tucked in behind this cold frame glass for a while, they're going to grow up strings and be tall. Again, no shade problem. I've planted corn back here. There will be staked cucumbers and climbing zucchini and so forth here. Again, on the north side, not casting shade on any of the lower crops, which I'm then going to put out in front. Now, out in front, we have a lot of beds, a lot of growing areas. And there's a reason for that. I'm always thinking in terms of a crop rotation. For example, these strawberries, which are here, they'll be somewhere else next year. This lettuce bed won't be here. It'll grow somewhere else. And that's really important because then these crops don't make the soil unhealthy for themselves. They get to grow somewhere else, and a different crop comes here. Now, the beds here are the width they are for a very good reason. This is 30 inches between the stakes, and it's an area I can step across. I'm comfortable working here, whether I want to stand here and pick weeds or just step from one side of the garden to the other. No problem. As a commercial grower, I used to grow in 4-foot wide areas, which were fine for a tractor, but if you ever tried to step across a 4-foot area, it just isn't good in the small home garden. The space in between each of the beds is a foot wide, and that's where I try and confine my foot traffic. I'm not maniacal about it. Occasionally I may step in there, but I've always found if I confine foot traffic to a walking area and leave this without foot traffic and without compaction, the plants grow much better. They can stick their roots down in there with nothing like hard soil to stop them. In fact, they put their roots down in there just the way I can put my hand in. Now that's the sort of soil you want to have to put seeds into. And if you have soil like that, hey, let's get some seeds planted.
One of the things I enjoy the most about my garden is that there's so many flowers in it that self-sow. That simply means that if I plant it one year, it'll go to seed in the garden, and the following year, all sorts of little volunteers will come up. For instance, this Shirley poppy, I didn't plant it this year. It just came from last year's plant that went to seed. When I find that something like this has happened, I evaluate the seedling and I decide whether it's in a good spot or not. If it's not, I weed it out. If it is, I leave it. These Shirley poppies look fine here growing around these campanulas, so I've left them be. The same with these little Johnny jump-ups, which are jumping up all over the garden. They're just darling right here along the edge, so whenever they've taken an edge position, I've left them. The trick is to recognize what's a weed and what isn't when they first come up. This is a Johnny jump-up, which is going to bloom just like that. This is a lamb's quarter, which looks very similar, but it's a weed, so out it goes. These little guys here are some alyssum, which are going to have lovely white flowers, and they still...
I decided...
If a taller plant self-sows, I have to make sure it's in a spot where it's not going to hide something else. Here, I'll show you an example. There are a lot of tall plants that self-sow in the garden. Cleome, Nicotiana, my tall pink perennial mallows will self from last year because they're pink, and this year I only planted blue ones. But they're fine. They self-sowed right behind these white Shasta daisies, but they don't hide them. And they form kind of a nice backdrop here for the garden. Next year, they may self-sow in the front, where they're not needed at all, so I'll just weed them out. A very tidy kind of gardener might not like to operate this way, but I think it's fun to work with nature and kind of look forward to her little surprises, and then just cull the ones that really don't fit in with my gardener's scheme of things.
All gardeners look forward to the time of year when they can plant seeds. It certainly is my favorite time, and I like to plant them in a fertile soil. And I know this soil is good and fertile because we have put in the compost, the rock powders, all the food that that seed will need to take it from sowing right through to harvest. That's the sort of soil that will make it grow best. Now, I'm prejudiced like any other gardener. I love these 30-inch wide beds I grow in, 1-foot walkway in between. But they're 30 inches wide for a reason. Besides being easy to step over, they're the right width for different rows of different crops. For example, 4 rows of something that doesn't take much space, like radishes. 3 rows of a crop like carrots fit nicely in the 30 inches. 2 rows of parsnips, beets, ones that need a little more space, and a single row of peas, corn, right down the center. Good space, plenty of rows to walk in between. That's the way I like to do it. Now, my planting tools are really pretty basic. A couple of sticks and a hoe. And if I'm putting in short rows, say I want just a few radishes every week, maybe I'll just put a row in right across the bed like this. A pointed stick like this does it easily. And I'll just take my packet of radish, open it and crease it. Makes a pretty simple planting machine. And I'm going to take a little extra time putting those seeds in. I'm going to tap them out carefully so they go in there at about 1 inch apart. Now that happens to be the distance at which they grow best. And so not only do I not have to think about coming along and thinning them, but they're going to get up to eating size just as quickly as possible with no problems. Now for another seed, I use a really complicated tool, a bigger stick. And this way I can make nice rows right on down the garden. And say I want to put a number of close rows, just like 3 rows of spinach in this bed. Easy to put in. They don't have to be too deep. If I want them a little deeper, I just run it like that. Sprinkle my seeds in, push the soil carefully over, pat the seeds in. For larger seeds and special situations, I use a hoe like this. This is an old design called the Cavex hoe. It has a curved bottom. I suspect it was designed for weeding, but what I prefer it for is as a planting hoe because of that curve. When I draw it with the curve down, I can pull all the dry soil on the surface off and get down to the nice, moist soil underneath. Then I take the pointed corner and make a small furrow right in that nice, moist soil. Now, this is important for crops that take a long time to germinate. Let's say these carrots. I want to put these carrots in at just the right spacing, again, carefully, like the radishes. But I want to make sure that even though they take a long time to come up, they're never going to dry out. And that's why I made that little curve first, because I'll push the soil over the seeds, tap it in, and then every day, at least once, I'll come along with a watering can and just put a little moisture in here. Because I made that curve first, it stays there, the carrot seeds are moist, and I get absolutely perfect germination. Once they come up, then they're on their own that the rest of the garden gets. Now, another important planting tool is right on the end of my arm, my finger. Basically, if I'm putting in large seeds, like corn, I can just poke a hole in the ground, put them right in, or even set the seed on top of the ground and poke it in there, about 1 inch. In fact, the proper planting depth for most seeds is about 3 to 4 times the size of the seed. So something small like a radish or a carrot that's, 1/8, 1/16 of an inch, you're only going to put it down 1/4 of an inch. Something like corn, which is really 1/4 of an inch, 4 times that, 1 inch, 3/4 maybe in soil where it'd have a hard time coming up. That's all you need to do. Now with corn, you don't want to put a single row right down the center, spaced apart like that, because you might not get good pollination. So what I do with corn, since I do want to fit only a single row in this 30-inch bed, is I plant in hills. I'll put 4 or 5 seeds in a little hill about 18 inches to 2 feet away from the next little hill. Just put them in there, pat it on top, come over here, and put another one in. And then when they come up, thin it to 3. That means there's 3 stalks at each place, and they can cross-pollinate each other. Works very well, makes it easy to cultivate in between and keep the weeds down. Now, one last thought about seeds. Along with these pea seeds, I'm going to put something else into the soil, an inoculant. Now, peas are a legume. Peas are able to take nitrogen out of the air and put it to their use. They do that in conjunction with a bacteria. And just to make sure that bacteria is in your soil, it's a good idea to buy some. It's sold, usually where you buy your seeds, in little packets like this, mixed with some peat moss. And the best idea is to sprinkle it with your seeds before you put them in the soil. Or even after you put them in the furrow, just come along with this packet and sprinkle a little of this on top before I put the soil over the top. The bacteria in this packet says specifically that it's for peas, are mixed in here with some peat moss to keep them alive until I mix them into the soil. Then the peas have access to all that free air nitrogen, and what the heck? Gardening naturally means making use of all the things that nature has to offer. Now, a lot of the seeds I sow, I don't sow in the garden, I sow in the house or in the cold frame. And then I bring out little transplants. And there's some good techniques for that, too. Come on along and I'll show you.
I like to give my flower gardens a bit of a wildflower look. Now, this is some plain old white yarrow that I picked in the field behind the house. I don't often see this for sale. If I did, I'd probably buy it because I like the simplicity of the original species. If it comes up by itself in the garden, I'll always leave it there. But I must say there's some perfectly nice hybrid yarrows that I can find in nurseries. Sometimes I don't like what hybridizers do to wild plants, but they haven't ruined the yarrows yet. In fact, they're coming out with some nice ones all the time now. This one in back here is an old standby. It's called Coronation Gold. And you can see why. There's a real strong gold color to its flowers. Some little baby katydid or grasshopper is sunning himself on the petals. I always like to see wildlife that feel at home in the garden like that. Here's another one. This is a slightly different yellow. It's called Moonshine, and it's got a pale sulfur yellow color that mingles well with lots of different other colors in the garden. It's looking very pretty right now next to those tall blue veronicas. It also has a nice gray, pale, fern-like foliage that's attractive even when the flower isn't in bloom. And there's some other yarrows in another part of my garden. Now, you may already be familiar with some of those yellow yarrows, and you may have seen some of the red ones like Fire King or Paprika. Those are great. I'm particularly excited by all these new pastel shades that are coming out. This one is called Salmon Beauty, and it's part of the Galaxy series that was developed recently in Germany. Here's another one. This is Apricot, and this is just starting to bloom in a lovely, soft ochre orange shade. Very subtle. And here's a softer red than some of them you'll find, Wesser River Sandstone. One thing I really like to do is to combine some of these pastels in a grouping that makes a lovely, subtle, lacy effect in the garden.
The key to success with transplants, like getting those little carrot seeds to germinate, is to keep them moist. And that's why I always carry a watering can and make sure that before I put my little transplants in the soil, whether they're in soil blocks or pots, I get them as wet as I can. That's because once they get put in the ground, this gives them enough moisture to allow them to grow roots out into the soil even if it doesn't rain for a while. Of course, if you can irrigate right after you transplant, so much the better. Now, I'm about to put these celery plants in and finish out this bed. In order to put these celery in at the proper spacing, I make a lot of little rigs like this. This happens to allow me to space 3 rows in this 30-inch bed with the plants 12 inches apart. And if I just press this into the soil at the proper distance from the last one, line up this edge I made with the string, set it in there, the spaces are marked right where I want to put these transplants. I have a wonderful little tool here. This is designed specifically for transplanting, keeps my wrist from working too hard, allows me to just poke it in and make a hole. Don't think too much. Just you want to make sure that you get the top of the ball they're growing in, or the top of the soil that was the top of the pot, just slightly underneath the ground when you put them in. If they have any long dangling roots, well, it's a good idea to dangle those roots down into the hole. No sense in having their roots, which want to feed in the soil, sticking in the air up above. Yeah, get those roots right down in there. And that's basically all there is to transplanting. Keep them moist, get them in the soil nicely at the right spacing where they'll grow well, and you'll have a great crop. If you think this tool is interesting, come on over with me to the tomatoes, and I'll show you another fascinating tool I use for transplanting.
Elliot, here are the last of the tomato plants.
Oh, that's great. Barbara would probably never allow anything as crude as this post hole digger in the flower garden, but I love it for digging holes for large transplants in the vegetable garden.
Elliot's experience as a commercial vegetable grower has taught him that the bigger the pot you put your transplants in, the bigger, better plants you'll get.
And if you have a big plant, you need a big hole. And that's what the post hole digger does so well. Let's put those in.
There you go.
Now, I'm putting these in a 30-inch bed at 2 feet apart. And that's because these are determinate plants. By determinate, I mean they're small plants as opposed to the indeterminate plants, which are the staking tomatoes. These will grow to a certain size, stop, and make fruit. And this is all the space they need. Now, if we were bothered by the fruit lying on the ground, we've never had any problem with it, we could put cages around here and grow them up cages. But basically, this works well for us.
Now, like most gardeners, we like to push the season a little bit. So we've got this floating row cover sitting here ready. It's a lightweight spun-bonded fabric that we can just gently put over the plants in case there's a danger of frost.
It isn't much, but it provides just that small degree of protection that makes the difference between freezing and being safe under there. And if we've gone to the trouble to grow such nice tomato plants, we want to make sure they survive and give us all the fruit possible.
You mean tomato plants?
Tomato.
Somehow we managed to share this garden.
This little salad garden is a great demonstration of the ideas of garden layout and sowing. In fact, it looks so good I want to bend down and graze. It's in a 30-inch wide bed, which makes it easy for me to work around. I have a 12-inch path here to stand in. And then it's laid out well with regard to the sun. Sun's coming in from here, so the carrots, the little shorter crop, aren't going to shield till they're picked, and there won't be any shade from then onto the beets after they are picked. The spinach will be harvested, and it won't shade the arugula on the back side. Now, this is great variety and wonderful salad, but it has other uses. These 5 crops help me avoid pest and disease problems, because I don't have a monoculture. I have what you might call a multiculture, all sorts of variety in here. And variety is one of the keys to success when you're gardening naturally. The other thing all these plants do together is prevent weeds because their leaves grow so closely. For example, this little bed back here was planted just 2 weeks later than this one. In fact, I plant one of these every 2 weeks in order to keep the progression going. And you can see then how quickly the leaves fill in. Once the leaves fill in, there's no sun down onto the soil, and you don't get any more weed growth. Just a little weeding when it starts, and this sort of crowded planting is very effective at preventing any more weeds. Now, all these guys are going to grow and grow big, and this close spacing is going to be too close once they get big. But that's no problem, because the carrots are slow growers, the beets are fast growers, and I'm going to have picked these beautiful red radishes, taken them back and eaten them. In fact, that's the whole idea of it, before they ever begin to shade the beet row back here. The spinach, I'm going to do the same thing. I usually come in here with a little pair of clippers like this and clip out little in-between plants, take them back for the salad. Nothing better in a salad than young spinach like that. The same with clipping out little arugulas. And over the course of time, I'm slowly thinning this out, so by the time all the radishes are harvested, there's plenty of space between the carrots and the beets. By the time the spinach is harvested, the arugula can grow on the back side. This is the ideal salad garden. Young, tender, fresh, and indescribably delicious. Carrots are one of my favorite foods, and I wait eagerly for the ripening of the first carrots of the season. Well, I can speed that up with a little trick, wider spacing. Carrots will mature sooner if they have more space between them. So in a bed like this, where I'm after the earliest carrots possible, I've thinned the first 2 rows there to 4 inches apart, the next 2 to 3 inches apart, and these to 2 inches apart. And this wide spacing will allow those first carrots to mature well ahead of these, and at least 2 weeks ahead of ones that were crowded. Now, I didn't have to thin widely the whole bed, just a small part of it, because I'll eat these, then a few days later these will be ready, and a few days later these will be ready. But the best thing about it is I get to eat that first tiny, tender, succulent carrot just as early in the season as possible. Nice.
Yeah.
Colors.
Yeah, they really look excellent.
When plants have ideal space in which to grow,
And plenty of sunlight.
you get a harvest as nice as this one. There you are.
Oh, it's like a bouquet.
And a tasty one at that.
Yeah, let's go fix it for dinner.
Sounds good to me. So if you'll excuse us, until next time, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.